I'm Joyce Eng with Gold Derby here with Eric Steelberg, cinematographer for Hawkeye. I believe this was your first foray into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So were you a fan of the MCU before?
I was. I've got two sons who have kind of got me into it, way back. And I mean, listen, starting with the original Iron Man, I always thought they were onto something and doing something really fun and exciting. And it's just progressed. And then obviously culminating with the Avengers and introducing the character of Hawkeye. It's always a good time. It's hard not to have fun with Marvel entertainment and their projects. So this was particularly appealing to me.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel to be part of the Hawkeye series? Because he's always been kind of a forgotten character. That's the joke.
He has, but I loved it. I love that they were doing that. And I love that they kind of made fun of him in the show for being a forgotten character.
It's a branding issue. Yeah.
Branding issue. And such a funny line. And no, there was a lot of fun opportunities on this project that I never really had an opportunity to do scale and scope and visual effects. But even there's the storytelling was really interesting, focusing on a character for, ability and sharing their ability is something that I've never really, I don't think I've explored in other kinds of films I had done. I mean, I had just come off Ghostbusters right before I did Hawkeye. So very different kind of project,
Yeah,
it was a blast.
Yeah.
Huh?
Different kind of VFX.
Different kind of VFX, different kind of characters, different palette for sure, but equally fun. Honestly, it was a really good time.
Yeah. Well, I love the show because I love anything set at Christmas. And everyone I've talked to from the show also love that it's set at Christmas. But I also love
Christmas in New York, by the way.
Yeah, Christmas in New York, that's the thing. But I love the aesthetic because you guys had to really have the Christmas feeling with the red and greens of New York City. But it was also juxtaposed with like the dark underbelly of the tracksuit mafia and the black market auction. So what did you and Rhys Thomas discuss, especially for the first episode when you really set the tone for it? And so much of that is in the first episode.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it elsewhere. Rhys is a big fan of the visuals of the 70s, mid to late 70s movies in New York, and as well as early 80s and the fun of the early 80s in their movies. And even more currently too, we created a shared iPhoto library of images, references from movies through the decades. We watched Thief and The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, and there's even references to, like, we even watched like John Wick for New York at Night, and with the gangsters and how that works. There's some references in the episode 2 when they capture Hawkeye in the abandoned toy store, and there's some references to Dead Poets Society with at the campus at night when Kate's sneaking around the bell tower. We looked at so much stuff. There's some, we looked at James Bond. Die Hard was a big reference for Rhys too. Obviously, a much more modern movie, but. And it was fun. It's just inspiration because we wanted to, and we watched other Marvel movies and the other Marvel series, which had been out at that point, which was WandaVision. And the great thing about Marvel is they let the filmmakers kind of lean into whatever the style and the palette is that story wants, so whatever direction Rhys wanted to push us, they were completely on board for it, because they just really want to support the story and the filmmakers and create something that's fun and different and feels different. So, all the conversations and viewings and talk about these other movies and references, kind of guided us into the visuals that we ended up with, in addition to, the production design and the costume design, like everything that we pointed the camera at, obviously contributes greatly to that as well. So, and it came up with a really fun result. In addition to the Christmas, what Christmas looks like in New York, which is obviously very well established in movies.
Yeah, and it's fitting for the kind of show Hawkeye is, because it's a lot more grounded than something like WandaVision or even like Falcon Winter Soldier, which it's a little bit more like the scale level is bigger, whereas this is kind of like street level too.
Yeah, which is important because, you know, Hawkeye is not, I mean,
He's a guy with a bow
I
and
would get
arrow.
in trouble for saying this, but he's not like a superhero in the way that the other Avengers are. He doesn't fly. He doesn't have an enormous amount of strength or, you know, intellect that lets him to do things that other people can. I mean, he's just a really good archer and he's tough, right? And he's scrappy, and which of course is an ability, but it's not superhero in the way. And it's fun that Marvel is giving, you know, credit to somebody with, you know, that a regular kind of guy can also be considered a superhero, right? And that he's sharing that and mentoring another kind of civilian with a similar ability that happens to be this young girl. And it's fun. And I think that that kind of character asks for a very familiar and grounded visual style. You know, and something that's more a little based in reality.
Yeah, definitely. I love some of the camera work you guys did because it kind of mimicked a bullseye, like especially the auction scene in the first episode when she's like Kate is spying through like the wine rack, and it looks like she's like zeroing on a target, and some of like the camera movements is like very fluid and smooth. So what was that your approach to?
It really was. I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah, no, it was very much, you know, somebody kind of like stalking their target and looking, you know, you're supposed to start seeing her come out of her shell a little bit and start giving visual cues that she's got this processing going on in her head, you know, that she can size things up and you can feel like she's ready to react in a way that, like, you know, a normal person wouldn't. So certainly, I mean, there definitely was, you know, the visuals trying to support that, you know, and not take away. And, you know, it's important to the story because we're trying to build up to it, you know, because prior to that, not all we see, but what the main thing we see is her, and, you know, at her college campus, you know, taking out this clock tower by accident, which shows off her archery skills, but it doesn't really, the character at that point, it's more like she's still a little bit of a college student, like a little bit of aware of, you know, how good she actually is. And then in the scene in the black market auction, you can actually see her start to process and put things together, which I think is really important, you know.
Yeah, some people call her the greatest archer in the world, so one scene I loved in the second episode is the larping scene, just hysterical. And again, it's a similar kind of like Archer bullseye shot because it starts with the back of Jeremy's head, and then he like hangs his head because he's like, oh God, I gotta like go through this. And then you do the slow-mo walk, and he's like half-heartedly taking down all the larpers. What was it like shooting that?
So much fun. So much. We were laughing nonstop. Every take, we would have to play back every take and show even Jeremy laughing so much. It's a great feeling. It's so much fun shooting something like that when everybody just, you know, it's completely ridiculous, but it's so right. You know, it's just exactly what we needed is at that point in the story. You totally buy it. It really works for his character. It is such a witty idea as a device to inject a superhero into basically a cosplay, you know, environment that he has to begrudgingly accept it and play along with to accomplish the next step of what he's after. And so we were just thinking, like, how ridiculous would this be? How do we embellish it visually? You know, some of that slow motion, just the shots behind his head, and even just hanging and not cutting, just watching him do this and watching all these amazing stunt performers that were the cosplayers, react in these ridiculous ways. You know, it's great. It's just a moment of levity in the episode that is really, really fun.
Yeah. And it works because they're taking it seriously. Like,
yeah, 100%.
It's hardcore for them, but not for him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And we watched, we found some videos in the research for how to portray the LARPing of people that do this for days and days, you know, in parks and actually set up camp and do this kind of thing, you know, and it's amazing. We actually got some ideas from some of those, some of that video research we did.
Wow. Well, that episode ends with the debut of Maya, and she's in this just dark red lit room.
Mhm.
So how did you guys light that shot? And it's so
You know, I
striking.
don't know. I don't remember how we came up with that idea of her in the red room. I mean, it was really straightforward. It was a red top light and making sure that the palette of the room, the production design, the set dressing all worked within, you know, red light, you know, which obviously can make things ironically monochromatic because it can wash out a lot of other colors. I don't remember how we got there, but I know it was an idea we had early on because we looked at it in our camera tests when we filmed Alakwa Cox with some red light and her various costumes before we started production to see what that would look like. I don't remember, maybe it was in the script. I mean, I can't remember, but there was a reference that Reese had found that was in this photo library of inspiration we had from a movie. And I remember it was like a movie, there was it's like this red hallway. It was really striking. And we thought, God, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the Maya introduction.
It's a very memorable debut. It's just
Yeah, you know, I think there was a little bit longer of a scene when we shot it. But it's still incredibly effective. And you know, and I think part of the reason is just the color contrast between being in her office and the scene you're coming out of in that kind of cyan, the mixed cyan and warm light of the main area in the toy store where they're questioning Hawkeye, you know, just on the other side of the wall, and the color contrast was really stark, and you know, it's a little spooky, but it just feels right.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you also did the grand finale, the last episode with the fight at Rockefeller Center. I know that was a huge undertaking because they actually recreated 30 Rock on a set in Atlanta. So what went into all of that? Because it starts with this like great like multiple mini Wonder fight with Kate and Yelena in the office. I love it because there's still people like working on Christmas Eve. So what was it like shooting that whole sequence?
That was really hard. It was one of the hardest sequences I've ever shot. It took a very long time, as you can imagine. And like you said, we shot it all in Atlanta. I think we filmed for a night, just only a handful of shots in actual 30 Rock Plaza. And everything else was honestly in Atlanta. You know, we built the ice rink, we built the plaza in front of the building, and everything else was extended by visual effects. It was the amount of I would say, let's see. So that was just one part of one episode, the finale. I would say probably half of the prep on the entire show was spent, for me, of my prep was spent on that whole sequence.
Wow.
Because it was a monster undertaking between visual effects and previs, second unit, what they were going to have to do, the various locations, the different cities, New York, Atlanta, and then of course, like I said, not being able to shoot very much in New York. Also because, like, as you can imagine, Rockefeller Plaza, especially during Christmas time, and the Christmas tree is like a very sacred place in New York.
It's iconic. Yeah.
It's iconic. It's like kind of like a no-go. Like you're not allowed to do anything detrimental to the tree or 30 Rock or the ice rink. And apparently we were the first production to be able to do something, you know, not
and also like during COVID,
the tree, you know, this very symbolic thing in New York, particularly at Christmas time. And we somehow were able to get permission, and we did it. So, you know, all that was in Atlanta, you know, as kind of the destruction happens. And it was, I mean, the conversations, everything from like, how white does the ice have to be that we were, you know, filming? We use a synthetic ice, you know, for the thing. How much tree do we need? How many Christmas lights are in the tree? You know, the different what are the different kinds of fights happening? We have to explode this one thing up on the side of the ice rink. How are we going to do that? where in the plaza are the fights happening, because we also have to be able to cut back and forth to these various parallel things happening in a way that you don't see what else is happening in other places, right? So we don't have to tie them together, even though we know it's all happening at the same time, but practically you don't have to tie them together. And then the stuff happening up in the building too. And then there's the stuff with the LARPers, and it was so much to track. It was so hard. I mean, the endless meetings trying to tie it all together, and then make sure that it didn't take, in order to service all these different scenes, end up taking an hour. It was really challenging, but the plan worked, and we're super happy with how it came out. We couldn't have done it without the help of our second unit.
It was very well done, because I was like, I know they did not shoot at 30 Rock, but it actually it looks like you guys
honestly
did.
It's some of the best visual effects I've ever seen. I know they spent a lot of time on it. I think the visual effects were finished right before the episode aired. All those months later after we shot it. I mean, they really they went above and beyond to try to play. I mean, there were shots, even when I watch it now, like I shot the thing, and I remember what we shot in New York and what we shot in Atlanta. And there's still some shots where for a minute I remember thinking when I was watching it, wait, did we shoot that in Atlanta or was that New York? I can't.
That's how good it was.
Good. It's still seamless. It is.
Wait,
I mean, there are people that worked on the show that were like, did we get the trucks in New York? Like, no, none of those shots. That's all in Atlanta. Those trucks weren't there, or like those people weren't even there.
Yeah.
So, the behind the scenes of how that was done is really interesting.
Yeah. So are you saying that 30 Rock brass knew that you guys were gonna shoot down the tree? And
Renner in
it?
I believe there was even meetings with the mayor. I heard it was a big deal.
So what was it like? I know you didn't actually stick him in the tree, it was like part of a tree that you stick him in there.
We stuck him in well, we shot Jeremy in the tree on a stage, but it was actually like a 30-foot tree. And we actually put him up in it to try to get a real, we wanted to be able to get low shooting up at him. And he went for it. He jumped in this real tree and got sappy and the whole bit. And,
with the owl,
with the owl, and we moved it around and tilted it. And it was great. It was great fun. It was a really good sequence. And it's one of those things that you read and you're like, this is enormous. How are we ever going to pull this off? Like particularly on a TV show streaming, kind of schedule. And it was just spread throughout the schedule, and particularly towards the back. I mean, I think the stuff that we filmed in the plaza itself, between the plaza and the ice skating rink, was like 4.5 weeks, all night, in this parking lot, north of the city in Atlanta, where just blue screens everywhere, and then this partial set, like the set, and then up about 10 feet, and then everything beyond that was
crazy.
Was digital. Really great. And then we had they built a facade of the building too, a small part of the building, to get the shots running up and down and jumping out the window as well. Then comp that in. So, and then it was fun, and it was challenging, because then it's like there's all these different kinds of light that happen there that is very theatrical and not what a cinematographer would normally light people and things with, like the colors and the kinds of lights, that's more like what you would see at like a concert or something. So blending all these different colored lights while still trying to make people look good and light up the sides of buildings and things was actually really challenging. And matching it too, because we had imagery that the visual effects team was filming in New York, to then composite into what we shot, and trying to make sure that the light from the real place matched the light that we were shooting months later in Atlanta, matched and also like looked good. It was a pretty big challenge, but it worked out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, lastly, I gotta ask about Rogers the musical. the mid-credits scene in the finale, but also we see a peek of it in the first episode. Love it. Love the song too, and the way it's shot, it's so like classic. It looks like a film, like stage performance. So what was that experience like?
Well, it feels like that because this is exactly what it was. As a film production, we didn't have the ability to also produce a musical within a film.
It should be real though.
But it was real. We actually hired a Broadway team to compose, stage, perform shot it in a theater in downtown Atlanta. I mean, it was, for all practical purposes, a Broadway show. I mean, it really was. It was one song, but it was, we had set builders that did, theatrical shows. We brought in lighting designers that did Broadway shows. And then so what we had to do is just kind of guide them in certain directions, say like, this is what we're thinking, and then let them kind of just go. And we would go, and Reese and I and some of the other filmmakers, we would go on weekends and watch kind of what they were doing, look at the setup, watch their choreography, listen to music, and just have an idea of what's in store and know how we were going to want to cover it. And there's a part where like Iron Man flies and Hulk smashes the things. And so we thought it'd be fun to have like a green light, cue. So all these conversations let the stage team, create the stuff. And then by the time we got there, we just showed up with cameras and just shot the angles that we wanted. And we did it for 2 days and just had a blast listening to the song over and over. Never got old. And everybody had smiles on their faces while we were shooting it. It was a lot of fun.
It's so much fun. It should be a real show on Broadway.
That's what everybody kept saying. We're like, oh my gosh, like how long until Kevin Feige wants to take this to New York?
And you can go shoot it. Yeah, direct the whole thing on Broadway.
It was shockingly good. It was it was definitely one of those things where it felt like it was going to have a future beyond that, because it started off as just like this little idea, this conversation that Reese Thomas had with Kevin Feige in order to solve a story problem, not a story problem, but a story point that was in the original drafts. And Reese thought, what if we did this musical, in the city? He was with his family and they were there, and how would that work instead? And it kind of was laughed off originally. And then, it was kind of like, I'm thinking about that. I really like that idea. And we're like, oh my gosh, we gotta produce this Hollywood musical, a Broadway musical. It's like, it was pretty daunting, but it was so much fun.
Well, Eric, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We're going to get on Kevin Feige to musical to Broadway now.
Yeah, write letters.
Yes.